I finally endured Meghan Markle's third episode of With Love, Meghan on Netflix. It was, I will say, the best episode I've seen so far out of the 3 that I've seen. Thanks to Roy Choy, really, not thanks to Meghan at all. Meghan made donuts at the beginning of the episode, and then they did several things with Roy Choy and made quite a few things together. She also made matcha, but they didn't show much of the matcha. We'll get back to the matcha in a minute. But Roy Choy was great. He was a good guest option. It leads me to think maybe this was the original plan for the show, that it was supposed to be Meghan and chefs from the start, like that was the concept, but they couldn't get enough chefs to agree to come on, so then it ended up just a couple of chefs and lots of just friends, and they had to pivot to more hosting and less cooking because duh. I don't know for sure, but anyway, when she was making these little cake donuts, just baked cake donuts in the oven, she mixed the melted butter and the sugar and then the egg, and she really mixed it together for a long time from what we saw on the show. And then she added the rest of the wet ingredients. Now, I'm just side note here, as somebody who bakes a lot and has made homemade cake donuts before, and I do a lot of baking. I love baking. Unlike Meghan, I actually like to bake. She said that she doesn't like baking in episode 1. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing it this way. Mixing your wet ingredients first is great, but you don't want to be over mixing your egg. That's a bad thing, because when you overwork your egg, which, there's almost no way that she would have not overworked her egg by adding it that early to just the sugar and butter, which was this grainy, stiff texture. It was a thick mixture with the egg, so then the egg would almost certainly be overworked at this point, and it can give any baked goods, but including cake donuts, a very rubbery texture because it creates too much elasticity in the dough, in the batter. And so adding the eggs towards the end of mixing your wet ingredients together is always going to be the best, or just lightly whisking them separately and stirring them in with something looser, like with the milk. That's going to be a loose mixture is the way to go. Just because this was on a TV show that's supposed to be telling you some tips and tricks for how to bake and host, and she was instructing how to make these cake donuts. She's like, well, first we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that, and we're going to do, mix this together. She was teaching the viewer how to do this. Don't do it this way. Don't add the eggs that early. Not that any of you are going to try her donut recipe, but seriously, don't add the eggs that early. He was complimentary of the donut when he tasted it, but then she's like, oh, I heard you like donuts, and he listed all of the donuts that he liked. Every single donut he listed was a yeasted donut. So I'm not sure he's a big fan of cake donuts. That was a little bit unfortunate, but he was nice about it, which was kind. They talked a little bit about LA being the donut capital, which it is. And I just want to say the best donuts in LA are Sidecar. They are so amazing. They are so good. If you're ever in LA or you live in LA and you haven't tried Sidecar donuts, please do go try. They have this butter and salt flavor donut, and sometimes they make these giant donut holes out of the butter and salt, and it is so spectacular, so delicious. It is a must try. No joke, no sponsorships here or anything, just do try Sidecar. They're so good. Randy's is incredibly iconic and whatnot and famous, but Sidecar is the best that I've ever had in LA. She says she makes matcha. We don't get to see her making the matcha. Randy took one sip and then they were just gone. Nobody was having the matcha after that. And so it leads me to wonder, if the matcha was not great, why didn't they just show her be like, oh, it's not good, let's just dump this? And because she says it's not about perfection, we're in the pursuit of joy, not perfection, then show us your mistake if it wasn't good, because it was kind of conspicuously missing from the rest of the episode. So I don't know. That was just kind of weird. Maybe a lost opportunity. A few times in this episode, we see Meghan in a sort of weird panic. And this episode was strange. We got a totally different version of Meghan in episode 3 than in previous episodes. She clearly does care about impressing Roy as compared to like Mindy in the last episode where she was super snooty and condescending. Here we see her is essentially trying to love bomb Roy Choy. She's trying to really charm him into liking her. And it's clear she's kind of anxious about this. Like, she says she's very tidy in the kitchen, but we've seen evidence to the contrary. We've seen the opposite. And she even says, like, when I see people being messy, I'm like, where's your home training? Sort of clunky, scripted line, it felt like. But look at how different her face and eye contact is in this episode compared to her episode with Mindy. Like, just look at the differences. I'll put them side by side up here. It also really struck me how her voice changes in this episode. She uses a sort of deep vocal fry sometimes, and at other times it's lighter and softer. It made me wonder what her normal, more natural voice is when she's not trying to, you know, put on a show of some sort. But she definitely had just a totally different energy in this episode than she did in other episodes. Like, very, very different. She makes a big deal about being from LA, and she does so in the context of, and this is her words, that people don't actually know what people from LA are actually like here, which is kind of that same immature view that reminds me of the engagement interview, which I'll link for you guys. We covered the engagement interview, and she had this same kind of, well, they just don't get us type of vibe. At multiple points, we've seen Meghan sort of team up with one person and be like, oh, nobody else gets how we are. We are the same, and no one else understands us. She did it with Harry, and she's doing it with Roy Choy, which is part of that sort of toxic manipulation with love bombing. It's that similar sort of tactic of it's us against the world, or we get each other and not everybody gets us. That sort of a thing. It can, when you're faced with it, make you feel more special or connected to the person, but in reality it's oftentimes, not always, but it's oftentimes more of a manipulation tactic. We had more sad knife moments and bad cutting in this episode, and like I said, I'm not laughing because not everybody's gonna be good at everything, you know. I have zero expectations. I'm laughing when this comes up because she's doing this show and presenting it as if she's really skilled in the kitchen and knows what she's doing, but then at the same time is saying it's not about perfection. And so it's just these two conflicting ideas. And every time they zoom in on her cutting something or doing something like this, like putting the eggs in too early, it's conflicting with the other narrative that she's trying to sell at the same time. So that's why I find it kind of funny. For no good reason, they start playing rather aggressively "Da Dip," that song. When I dip, you dip, we dip, that song, while they're making kimchi. And the cringe just flew off the charts. It was far too intense for me. This was the worst. I had to mute it. It was really bad. And I certainly, like, if I were Roy Choy, I would be embarrassed to be involved in that, because he wouldn't know that they were going to play it in the post-production. He wouldn't know that. So that's not very fair. She claims in this episode that she makes a crudité every single day for her kids, which is a little surprising, I must say. But I also don't think we should have a crudité in every episode of her show. So far, we have had a crudité in every single episode, and we just don't need it. The music was, once again, over the top and out of place throughout this episode, and it was an entirely different Meghan as well, which is just crazy. It was so distracting because she behaved so differently around Roy, who she wants approval from, as opposed to somebody she feels superior towards, like Daniel and Mindy. It's just something that you don't see from other hosts within the same genre. You don't see that. Like a completely different human being treating their guest in a completely different manner. And that just elevates the argument that this is so contrived and inauthentic, because we're getting different versions of Meghan. So which one's the real one? How are we supposed to relate with and bond with this host who is changing on us? As for recipes and cooking or like how-to type stuff, this episode is the first that had some degree of interest thanks to Roy. Exclusively thanks to him. His segments, as I said, the one with Meghan and the donuts at the beginning was actually bad advice, a bad example. But Roy, he knows what he's doing. He is an accomplished chef. And so that part of it was quite interesting. he had sent her instructions on how to prep the chicken that they were going to then fry and dress together with various sauces. And while dealing with the raw chicken, she put it into a brine bath. She didn't wash her hands at any point, and she did leave on her rings. Don't do that. If you're going to deal with raw chicken, it's just nice for the viewers to see you wash your hands afterwards, because otherwise a lot of people watching it are going to be thinking about your germy hands. She didn't wash them before she went to put them in the fridge. It wasn't cut. The scene just showed her go and touch the fridge handle and the pot with raw chicken germs on her hands, and it was a one-shot moment. So that was kind of icky. She also has the parboiled chicken loose leaf in the fridge. And parboiled, for those who don't know, is not fully cooked still. It's partially cooked. Therefore, it should still be handled and treated the same way you would treat and handle raw chicken, because it's not fully cooked. Anything that's not fully cooked up to that 165 degrees Fahrenheit should not be treated as fully cooked. And she treats it as fully cooked. Also kind of gross. Claims that adding sparkling water to scrambled eggs makes them better. And I personally would disagree. I don't recommend adding any sort of water or really any liquid to eggs at all. While water, or any type of water, not necessarily just sparkling, can add fluffiness to the eggs, it also dilutes the flavor and it can lead to a rubbery texture. And often, because it creates a thinner mixture of egg, then you can accidentally overcook them as you see that water and steam evaporate, and then you get a weird crumbly sort of egg. I recommend just butter, just melted butter in scrambled eggs, kind of like a version of Gordon Ramsay's method of on and off the high heat and stirring all the time. Creates really, really luscious, silky scrambled eggs that are a great texture. So that's just maybe a difference of opinion, but also be aware of trying water in your scrambled eggs is not always the best way. It can affect the texture and the taste of the eggs a lot. There's more day drinking in this episode as well. It was certainly the best episode so far, thanks to Roy's recipes and his contributions. They were interesting and they were significant. Meg, on the other hand, was kind of outshined here. She was definitely in the role of assistant, and sometimes there was moments where she was trying to lead in pouring the ingredients into a blender for the various sauces that they were making and the kimchi mixture that they were making. She was kind of trying to lead the way, but it's his recipe. So there was just a little bit of an awkward or less smooth dynamic. It was a little bit clunky because it just wasn't a clear format to the viewer. Who's teaching us right now? It wasn't clear. But again, I think what stood out most was just how strange it was to see Meghan act so differently where she wanted to be liked by Roy. I don't know. So for the series as a whole, so far, 3 episodes in, this one was the best. Can a series be carried by 1 or 2 good episodes? No, absolutely not. Just because there's a couple that were okay and the rest are horrible and not good watching or good viewing, it's not going to make the whole series work. I still didn't find it to be engaging. It was still boring. It was still not great, but it was marginally better than the other 2. I will be back with episode 4, and then we will pause our journey through this drab and boring drag of a show to do a fashion edition on her outfits in the first 4 episodes. That will be coming out soon, so be sure to subscribe so you do not miss it. Thank you for joining me for today's video. I hope you have a happy day ahead, and I will see you next time. Bye!